Welcome to Rooftop Conversations. Today, I have the pleasure and the honor of interviewing someone so cool and so amazing within my own Asian American community. I had the pleasure of interviewing today intuitive sex educator Sydney Rae Chin, a sex educator based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And Sydney has an amazing array of workshops, and her Instagram presence is super social justice based, but also super reflective and spiritual. And that's something that I love about her platform. And of course, her amazing boudoir pictures. Like those gave me life, and it was the biggest motivation in me following her on Instagram. And I'm so glad that like you don't really get a chance to like get to meet your Instagram heroes. And I feel like I got to not only meet like virtually get a follow back from Sydney, but also I'm interviewing her today, which is I'm super nervous but super honored and super like um excited for this. So Sydney, you have an amazing resume, and I will not do you justice to the bio. So if you could tell the viewers just like a quick 2 to 3 minute summary about you, yourself, and like what people should know about you and your work.
So I am a queer intuitive sex educator. I am a third generation Chinese American, so a lot of that is very important to my work and who I serve. And I serve and empower API women and femme survivors specifically. But obviously, I'm not limited that to like I'm not like limiting myself to only that. But like that's who I primarily serve and like to talk to and be in community with, but also like working with other women of color as well. I like combining um, intuitive arts, so Reiki, which is something that I'm like putting on the back burner for now, but tarot is the thing that I've been drawn to lately, and combining that with reflection and with talking about consent and boundaries and how that all ties together because I feel like intuitive practices like tarot and altar work, they really let you reflect on your place in the world and also how to maintain those boundaries in terms of not only like physically or in sexual situations, but in every situation in your life. And I got into this work because I'm a survivor of intimate partner and sexual violence. And I was just really upset that I didn't see anyone like me doing this work and like okay, there are other people but they don't exactly do what I do, um and I want to acknowledge that, but I didn't really see people like me in the big organizations like Rain. Know Your Nine is definitely a bit better, they're definitely more inclusive, there's definitely people there that are people of color, but like in other orgs it's just very white and they don't necessarily understand the cultural components of being a survivor of sexual and intimate partner violence because you can't divorce my Asianness from my survivorhood or survivorship. Like it just can't be divorced. So that's why I got into that work or this work, and that's basically what I do.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like a lot of sex education is very white, cisgendered, white dominated spaces, very like white feminism space. Like in it, like from my experiences at least, and it's really cool that you're doing this work, at least like serving as a platform for the API community, and sex in our community is something that's so still stigmatized and also very secretive, right? It's not talked about, and it's great that you're doing this, undergoing this work, so that folks, other survivors who identify as Asian American or Asian American or Pacific Islander can also use you as a resource and things like that. So, in your own words, I think you definitely touched on it a little bit about what intuitive sex education is, but how is that different from how we see, let's say, like sex education, like typically taught and things like that? How are those two different, and like why did you specifically focus on intuitive sex ed as opposed to other forms of sex education?
So for me and my healing journey, tarot, altar work, vision boards have been really, really instrumental in my healing. And that's why I call myself an intuitive sex educator because I rely a lot on my intuition. And that's how I start doing the inner work so that I can hold space for other people because like without the inner work, you can't hold space for other people. And that's just like one of the business ethics that I work by and live by. Um, and intuitive sex ed to me is combining intuition with sex education. So I'm rolling out an 8-week program um in mid-September that will be coming out. And like part of that program, so one of the weeks it's gonna like go like switcheroo. One of the weeks will be more on intuitive, so like tarot lesson, and then another week will be on something more education based, so like consent and boundaries, an extension of that workshop, and like all these concepts that go into being a survivor and learning that education to maintain and like set your own boundaries, because as survivors it's you've had your or I've had my boundaries crossed as a survivor many too many fucking times. So for me it's important to talk about consent and to talk about how it goes beyond sex and how it can deepen our relationships, and that really ties into intuition and just trust in your inner knowingness, because once you do that and combine it with that education, it's just magical. And that's been my own experience. And then also part of the program, for the first 5 people who sign and pay in full with me, they'll be getting virtual boudoir sessions. Yeah, it's gonna be great.
Wow. That's so amazing. And like, yeah, I think like um those things I agree. I think like there are people, when people think boundary setting, they always think like romantic relationships or sexual relationships. There's so much more that we can talk about, right? Parental and child relationships, other familial relationships where we need to set boundaries, especially with the API community. I feel like there like typically is like no boundary between those familial relationships, but like those things are needed, and even within like platonic friendships as well. And I think it's so important. Like the work that you do is so important to like the healing of survivors, and of course like the solidarity of survivors as well. Um, so you mentioned like a little bit about, and I'm going to segue a little bit from what like I have planned to talk about, but you mentioned boudoir, and you wrote an article about how going like doing boudoir has been a huge part of your own healing journey as a survivor, and it's like you don't mind talking about that a little bit, and how like how that helps you in your healing journey, but how it can also help other folks in the same situation on their healing journey, since you are offering a boudoir session within your workshop package.
So boudoir for me, okay, where do I begin? So basically, I found out about boudoir through Philadelphia Boudoir, which is an Instagram that people should follow. And then I also came across Cheyenne Gill's studio, who I went to like a lot of lingerie parties back before COVID. um, and what I found for myself is that to be in that environment where there was no shame or judgment around my body and how it looked. Again, these are very intentionally curated spaces. And eventually now, Manifold Studios, who my 2 friends and 2 co-founders, Mare and Devin, opened up. You can also follow them on IG. They do lovely boudoir work, and creating these intentional, safer spaces to explore not only social justice, but also your own body. And for me, I had my boudoir shoot back in, I think yeah, February, right before lockdown, like a month before we all got locked down. Um, and it was, for me, it was the first time that I felt myself, and it was my own body, which was huge for me. Like, after not feeling like I owned my body for a long time because of the trauma that I've gone through, especially with sexual violence, it was very healing to be in a space where like, okay, you're gonna be tended to, you're gonna be cared for. Like, you don't have to worry about like what you do today. Like, I'm here for you. And my friend slash photographer, Devin, she really creates these spaces, as well as Mare, her co-founding partner. They both create these amazing spaces to do this work. And that's how I really got, like, first of all, the pictures are beautiful. So like that's, as someone who's a film major, that's why I got really interested in boudoir. And then when I heard about like the emotional aspect and like actually had a boudoir session, and again, I had the privilege and have the privilege to invest in myself. thank goodness, which I also want to acknowledge that's a huge investment to like put that on your put into yourself, um and having that class privilege to do so, like, it was just amazing. And at the end of my session with Devin, at the end of my first session, because there's going to be many after this, I'm sure, I literally bawled my eyes out because I felt so safe. And it was just the first time that I really reclaimed my body and like was okay with just being naked with myself and with her in the room. And like I like finally felt that like, oh, everything that I've been working on, now I can see this progress and now I can see it like visually for myself. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize I could like look that beautiful or like hot. Like what? um and that was because a lot of trauma with emotional abuse and with sexual violence that I didn't feel that way for so long. So then when I saw those photos, it was magical. And it's definitely like I think an add-on to therapy and with creating these healing spaces. It's not just a one and done thing. It's continual.
100%. Like, first of all, your shots were amazing. They were beautiful. They were gorgeous. I was like, that's what actually drew me to your page. I was like, oh my god, I need to know this person. Their shots are amazing. I can't believe they do this because I've always wanted to do something like that. Like for me, I think like being a person who has undergone trauma from fat phobia, I have like a complicated, interesting relationship with my body that I'm still healing from, and I definitely can understand how like something like boudoir photography or even just like for me, like I know in law school, I had like my body image issues like resurfaced. Like it was like on pause during college and then resurfaced again during law school. And I definitely use like creating my own photo shoots, creating my own aesthetics and like doing my own sets as a way of like healing and therapy and everything. And I definitely agree. Like it's there are different ways and modes of healing, and like boudoir from your experience sounds wonderful and amazing and so therapeutic and healing. And thank you so much for being open about that journey on this platform. I really appreciate you being vulnerable and telling me a lot about your experiences. Um, so you did say, like, you know, like didn't see you pursued a career in sex education because you didn't see folks like yourself represented in the space. So I would love to hear, like, what has been your personal experience like, been like as an Asian, like as an Asian sex educator, and how, like, what challenges have you faced during that, like, within your career?
So, for the most part, I've been in mostly people of color spaces, which has been definitely safer. And I've been challenged in those spaces as I should be because I'm a light skinned East Asian woman and my own internalized anti blackness should always be challenged. That's a given. Um, but when I was in a program. I think it was back in March when COVID first started, and I had won a giveaway for this program. I won't name names because I just that's not me. Um, but it was this program with this certain company where it was a lot of older white people. And so you can imagine being the only person of color in the room and being young. And then also it's surprising because I'm light skinned East Asian too, that you would think my proximity to whiteness, or at least I thought my proximity to whiteness would like protect me from these things happening, but apparently it just doesn't. Um, which is also true. Uh, the whole time, these were like, you know, the white spirituality people who are like new age and they think that they own fucking healing arts, which they don't, and they
Yeah,
should know.
which is like kind of like appropriation in a way too, because black and brown folks and indigenous folks have done. But that's another. That's
Well, it's part of this, and like so they were all like, "Oh, we don't know what to do with our programs." And then the whole time they didn't really engage with me, so I didn't feel like I belonged there. I felt like I was ignored or I was ignored. Not that I felt like I was ignored. I was excluded. And I don't know if it's because of ageism too, because I'm like 23 or 22 at the time. And it was just not a great experience. It didn't align. It made me feel horrible the whole time. And like, these people just did not check themselves. I'm like, how can you not check yourself? As a sexuality professional, you need to fucking check yourself. Also, let Black and brown sexuality professionals lead the fucking way. They've been doing this for way longer than you. Like, part of racial justice is also reproductive and sexual justice. And so, like, Angela Davis, Miriam Kaba, they've all been doing the work. But how are you not acknowledging this? So, like, that was a very frustrating experience. But on the flip side, now I'm in this amazing cohort with my business coach, with Cameron Glover, who's at the Cameron Glover on IG. You all should check her out. She's amazing. And I've never felt better about my business and about where I'm going. Whereas in the other course that I was in, I felt clueless. But here, like, I'm empowered by the people in my cohort. They're all wonderful people. And like, it's just amazing to work with all these people because we're all cheering each other on. We don't see each other as competition. We're like, hell yes, like, I want to work with you. And like, I've been planning a couple IG lives with a couple folks in my cohort. And like, that's amazing compared to the experience that I had before where they were like, I see you as competition. I'm like, no, I shouldn't be your competition. I should be your community. And also, I should be checking you because, oh my God, in that course that I was in with all the white people, there was someone with a Ganesh painting. And I'm like, you're a white dude. Why do you, what? Like, sir, why do you have a Ganesh painting? Please explain. And they were all like, we don't know what to do. I'm like, well, maybe have better business ethics moving forward because that's the way. Because people are not going to put up with your racist bullshit. Neither will I.
But also just even like listening to folks who like are Black and brown or Black and indigenous folks who have been doing this work, right? It's like it's one thing to like not know, but it's one thing to like blatantly ignore, and that's what just that kind of seems like. I don't think they just don't know. I just think they just don't want to take the effort to do more. You know what I mean? But like I'm I'm glad to hear that your experiences with this new cohort has been much more positive for you. I'm glad that there is a community. I think with any type of healing work, whether you're a sex educator, whether you're an organizer, whether you're an advocate, I think community is the way to go, right? I think like competition is a capitalist scheme. It's like it's something that is putting people together. The reason why organizing is healing work is because it's community based, right? Mutual aid, finances, people are pulling in together their resources to help the betterment of the whole. And I think that's how, in my opinion, that's how healing should be. It should be a community based effort. So, like, yes, like, there are a lot of challenges to this work, but I would love to hear a little bit more about like what about this work is like really rewarding for you? What has been one of the highlights of doing this work? I think sex education work is much needed. It's definitely hard work, but it's also something I think it's work that is very beautiful, and I think I respect folks who do it, who do the work and put in the effort and the labor. So I would love to hear from your words, like what has been like the most rewarding experience about your work and like your career so far.
So far in my very early career, which is already burgeoning, and I'm really happy about that. And I can only see it bloom from here. My like the happiest moments are when people that I work with and clients, they just, or even other educators that I work with, when they feel healed with something that I offer, and I've been offering tarot readings to people that I know recently, that I know, both within and outside the cohort, and it's been really like it makes me happy when I see that like people are affirmed by what I say, and like I'm affirming their experience, because even if I might not have their experience, I'm at least affirming it, and that's like the least that I can do, because I will never understand like a Black woman's experience, because that's not my experience. And the most rewarding things have been seeing people go, oh, I never thought about these questions before. I'm going to go think about these, and I'm going to go reflect. And then also seeing like community conversations on different platforms, especially lately, with a lot of survivors coming out within the Greek community. I just want to say that I still see them and I believe them because I am one of them. Um, and to see people look to me as a resource is like really, I mean, part of it's kind of imposter syndrome. I'm like, what, me? But also I'm like, wow, okay, people like see me as an expert. I don't like the word expert, but for lack of other words, um, but for people to see me in that way and to trust me in that way to lead conversations within community, it's really heartwarming, and it means a lot that people are now seeing me in the light that I've been seeing myself. And now I'm like, oh, okay, I'm really stepping into like what I'm meant to do. And that just makes me happy when people do point to me as a resource and see me as a resource and want me to be part of these conversations within their community and to facilitate these conversations, because these are conversations we need to have both with survivors, obviously, but also survivors who have also perpetuated harm. Because as a survivor, you have to check yourself and you have to check your unchecked trauma. Because if there's unchecked trauma that you don't check, it can like fester. And I've had that happen in my personal experience with my abuser, which hopefully they'll learn, but we'll see. Can't promise that. I mean, yeah. And then also just bystanders and everyone else in community. So how do we keep everyone accountable? And I love doing this work at all different types of spectrums because you can really see the growth and like, I don't know, it's just beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. And like, I think in a way, like you're saying, right, it's collective healing. Like, it's not just, yourself, but I mean, like, not just like those who like, not just speaking to like abusers, but also speaking to victims, also speaking to, not victims, sorry, survivors, also speaking to like your own internalized trauma, like working through that, and also speaking to bystanders, right? It's a community effort that everyone, healing is a community effort. Which actually goes to my next question. I've seen a lot on your Instagram stories. You talk a lot about, especially, with this, as a result of the uprising and people talking about police brutality, a lot of folks are talking about and questioning the carceral state and abolition. Those conversations are happening. And there's a lot of words between like restorative justice versus transformative justice. And a lot of folks, like, including myself, are grappling with the nuances between the two and how we see a world. How do we see an abolition, like a world with abolition, right? And like, for a lot of folks, justice, even with amongst like the progressive or social justice circle, for us, justice still looks like us depending on the carceral system, right? Like locking up someone who murdered someone or locking up someone who abused someone. So, but I've seen a lot of your posts talking about restorative justice versus transformative justice. And I would love to hear in your own words what your thoughts are on the two differences. Well, first of all, in your own words, what the difference between the two are, and how do you what's it called? Like, what are your thoughts on the debate between the two concepts, between restorative justice and transformative justice, and how it links to healing and how it links to the healing of survivors?
So restorative, I see as more interpersonal accountability and like people to people. And I took a workshop with Amplify RJ, which taught me a lot about that. I've been meaning to take another training, but like right now I'm just too busy. So hopefully that I'll be able to take more training in that to understand restorative justice better, but that's how I understand it right now. And then transformative justice is about the systems and dismantling the systems and understanding at a macro level, okay, like what are the root causes for someone to act out in such a way? Like what do they need support with? And how do we hold people accountable? How do we hold community accountable? Because there's going to be people that are complicit. There's always going to be people complicit. And there's always going to be people who are bystanders and whatnot. Like the whole spectrum of people. And how it relates to survivors is I really believe in transformative justice because like the system as it is, especially with being someone who has gone through a Title IX process and had to drop it, the systems, they work, but they're broken. So we have to dismantle these systems. And how are we going to do that? Through community accountability. I don't think that locking someone up or punishing them. I mean, I still have complicated feelings, obviously, around my own abuser. Like, that's really hard to sit with sometimes. Um, but I don't think that locking this person up, this person who abused me, would do them any good. Like, it's just going to create more trauma for them. And then if you have a cycle of trauma, then you're just going to keep perpetuating trauma on other people, and that's not good. Um, and I think instead, by like creating a pathway, obviously, it is not on the onus of the survivor to, be the emotional laborer for the abuser. No way. Don't agree with that. But community should, hold the abuser or people who harm accountable as community. Ask the survivor what they need and what they want. And if the abuser or rapist doesn't comply or doesn't cooperate, then like they need to be called out. And yeah, it may be not cut and dry, and maybe people think it's cancel culture, but no, 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 it's not. And I have a whole live coming up with Jamie Drapiza. They and I were doing a live on accountability and cancel culture, because for some reason people seem to mix up those two. But no, it's not cancel culture to call someone out if they caused harm. They're trying to reduce harm within the community. And if they're not cooperating in any other way and you have to call them out, then that's just gonna have to be the thing. And like, that's just something that community has to grapple with and figure out how to grapple with it. And then there's great orgs like Menergy in Philadelphia that are doing work with people who have caused harm and abusers to not only have the survivors know what's going on from a distance, but also really work with abusers to work through their own trauma, and to understand why they caused these harms on an interpersonal level, so that they can be accountable and so that these harms won't happen in the future. And so there's harm reduction.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think when people, I think like when like exactly like you said, it is a difficult topic to to grapple with, because you know we grew up in a carceral system. We grew up knowing that justice is served through imprisonment or someone going to jail. And you know um it's interesting to see. I think like you made a great point about, it's difficult to, to kind of grapple with, but also like you wouldn't want someone to be incarcerated, face their own trauma, and then continue that cycle of harm in the community. And like instead, like just rather just let's work together as a community to reduce the harm that is in our community, and then work together to go forward. And I think cancel culture, like I agree, like you're holding someone accountable, like like I think like at the end of the day, it's an act of love, right? It's not just an act of love for yourself, but also the act of love of the community. If you're not going to call someone out, that's like kind of irresponsible, right? You're kind of letting the harm just sit there and perpetuate and like normalize. And um, you know, well, I'm definitely gonna. I look forward to that live that you're having, and I'm excited to see it. I'm definitely gonna promote that, if with your permission, of course, all over the video and everything. Um, and yeah, so like as you mentioned, like I think for a lot of people, sex is a very stigmatized topic. It's still something that people don't openly talk about. Even people who are, as liberal, or not liberal, but as like progressive and open, it's still kind of that topic that people like to tiptoe around. And I feel like from my personal experiences growing up as an Asian American in the country, sex is something that is like not talked about. It's like I think the only conversation I've had about sex was just don't do it. And then also, like, it's something that you do. Like, I feel like when at least for my family, it's just like the mechanism used to create children, and like it's kind of like more about procreation as opposed to like pleasure and other things. And I think for a lot of Asian American folks, something that's like swept under the rug, right? Like, so anything to do with sex, it's like no, 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 it's taboo, it's stigmatized. It's like no, we shouldn't we shouldn't talk about it. So I would love to hear from you as a sex educator who is Asian. how does one break and dismantle the stigma around sex within the AAPI community? So it doesn't necessarily like someone as a sex worker, but even just like everyday Asian Americans like myself, like how can we begin to break that stigma and dismantle that stigma?
So I think dismantling this the stigma is first talking about consent, because a lot of Asian Americans do not understand, especially older Asian Americans and my parents' generation, they just do not understand how consent or boundaries work. Um, I love my parents, but their boundary work needs work. Um, so talking about consent and boundaries is really integral to this conversation, and I feel like that's where we need to start. We need to start at the basics. We need to start at acknowledging that consent and boundaries is not only sexual, it's not only in sexual situations, but it's in every situation, whether it's your parents, you talking, or like friendships, whatever, all the spectrum of relationships, and like acknowledging that. Like, that's the first step. And then I think the second step is also going along with that, like realizing that people have autonomy, because a lot of Asian families just do not get this concept of like, oh, your children have autonomy to do whatever the like when they reach not, I don't like to use the word appropriate, but when they reach an age where they get more curious, like they should have autonomy over their own body, but also understand, like, okay, when something doesn't feel right, like you need to sit with that and also talk to someone if you're comfortable. um and then just talking about consent and boundaries, I feel like, will lead to sex talks anyways, and lead to more fruitful, productive sex talks within our community. Because I remember my sex talk was like, okay, just make sure you love the guy. Okay, this is assuming that like I'm a straight person. Granted, I am hetero presenting, but I am queer. um so my parents were like, just love the person and wear a condom. And I'm like, I heard nothing about consent. And so, like, that's where we really have to start, consent and boundaries, and practicing that within our own families so that we can embody that for generations, for our children, for, I don't know, everyone in the community, to make it less taboo and make it more about, like, okay, what fills your needs talk. And, like, then we can talk about pleasure. Then we can talk about all these other things. But first, we have to cover consent and boundaries.
I agree. I think with an Asian family, like it's so weird because like okay, so okay, so like fun fact about me, I'm not a hugger, and I think it comes from in Thai communities, no one really hugs. Like it's not really like a hugging culture. Like so like I mean, once in a while, like like my parents will like give me a hug, like like the pat on the back, like the congratulations, you graduated. You know, like the once in a while, like once in a year type of hug. Or like, you'll ask like, "Oh, can I have a hug?" or something like that. But like sometimes like but like for me, hugging is like that's a bound. Like I don't even like hugging like my own best friends. Like it's people think it's a little weird, but like I have like a very like personal space like boundary. Like I have like this like I don't know what it is. Like I generally don't know what it is, but like I hate like people like being in my space. Like hugging makes me super uncomfortable. So, when I see like extended family, they're always like, "Oh, can I have a hug? Can I have a hug?" The aunties and the grandparents, and they're always like, "Oh, can I have a hug? Can I have a hug?" And like if I refuse, I look rude. Like my mom, like, "Oh, why don't you hug? Why are you being so mean? Just go hug them." And like, instead of just teaching kids like, "Hey, you don't need to hug them if you don't want to," type of thing, right? And I think like now that I'm seeing consent being more talked about with children, I love like how like people are especially like parents are teaching their kids like, hey, if you don't want to hug that person, it's okay. And I've seen that like online, like like I think like that's something that Asian communities like still need to talk about. And I know like another thing too that kind of disturbs me too with like boundaries and consent is like okay, I don't know if this happened to you, but I know this happens to me. Like when you would wear shorts, right? Like as a kid, like you would just wear shorts around the house, and you have a male relative, like an uncle or like a grandpa, or someone come visit, and then your mom or your aunt's like, go cover yourself up, go put something on that's more proper, and it's like instead of talking, okay, like there's like that obviously different levels, but like instead of putting the blame on me for wearing shorts and a t-shirt or shorts and a tank top, why are you not putting the onus on the older elder or talking to them? Like if they're like thinking of me in that way, they're the problem, not me. I think that's something that I don't know if that happens like with all Asian communities, but I know like for my family that's happened to me. And I'm just like, wait, why am I being the one that's targeted? I'm just hanging out in my shorts. Like, what am I doing here? You know what I mean? So yeah. Um, and I agree. I think like the basic level of just like knowing what's like the boundaries of consent is like so important. Um, which moves on to my next question. Well, you said to dismantle and do those things, we have to start at the basics. But how do we cultivate that sex positive uh, community and environment within our? I mean, sorry. How do we cultivate that sex positive environment within our own communities? Like, how do we continue the conversations? How do we keep like normalize this discussion beyond like the conversation about consent and boundaries?
I think a lot of it has to do with embodiment. I feel like at least with the people that in my family, the more that I'm more aware and like show that my mindset's change, they like are like, oh, okay, like I see what's going on. They might not agree and it's gonna take time, but I think embodying it for parents, for people younger than us, also learning for people that are younger than us is really important because there's really badass Gen Zs out there, and I'm just like, wow, I wish I could be that cool at your age. What? Um, and I think learning from each other through doing is like the way to destigmatize and dismantle because when you try to talk to older Asians, it's just a wall. It's just like talking to a brick wall. And also, I really relate to like being told like you can't wear short. Even now, as a 23-year-old, I live at home, so my parents are like, "Oh, you can't wear a bra downstairs." I'm like, well, "Why? It's summer. It's super hot. I'm gonna wear a fucking bra if I want to." And they're like, "It's inappropriate." I'm like, "Inappropriate for who? Like, you're uncomfortable with it? You should check yourself." Um, but I think talking to elders about like checking themselves, they have a really, really tough time. So to destigmatize, we all have to do it by example. And I think doing it by example is the best way that like the older Asians really understand it. They're like, oh, they see you doing this badass thing like with your business or whatever. And then they're like, oh, I get it now. Like, okay.
No, I agree. I think a lot of that comes from like this Asian mentality of like respecting your elders, right? Like being an elder means you're going to be respected by those younger than you, and obviously that's not the case, right? You know, if someone older than you is disrespectful to you, they have every right to be called out, and it's also kind of ageist in a way, like oh, younger folks that don't have experience or don't know any better, but it's something that's like so rooted into Asian tradition that like if an elder is being called out or called in, they get like a little defensive, like, "Oh, wait, what are you doing? You're like stepping out of line." So I do agree. I think example is the best way to go. It's definitely worked with my own parents as well, like leading by example. I know for me, like I'm privileged in a way where like my parents are a little more liberal when it comes to talking about sex. Like they didn't use euphemisms, like like they just said penis and vagina. Obviously, in our language, right? But they didn't use like the cover ups, which I appreciate them doing. Like they kind of were just like, this is a penis, this is a vagina. We're not going to sugarcoat it for you. I appreciate them giving me that talk. I've also talked to them about condom usage before because like I used to be a youth advocate and worked for an HIV/AIDS group. So like seeing like them seeing me do these things and also like talking about it through my work has allowed them to like open up and be like, okay, maybe we can start talking about this and things like that. And even things like for me in my family, like with fat phobia, my family struggles with like both like fat phobia and also internalized fat phobia, since a lot of the family members I have are are also on the bigger end. So like them seeing me live unapologetically as a fat woman has, I guess, like broken the ice a little bit for that conversation to happen. It's still there. We're still working on it, but it's definitely grown. And same thing with like BLM, like them seeing me go to protest, them seeing me take movements. They're like, okay, like let's hear her out. Let's have discussion. Let's like, and I think you're right. I think leading by example is the way to kind of engage our elders into the conversation, whether it's dealing with sex, whether it's dealing with racism, homophobia, fatphobia, sexism, and all. I mean, and racism and all that. So I definitely agree. Um, so I know that you don't consider yourself an expert, but like I think you're an expert to me. I think you're so awesome. I think you're very knowledgeable even within our talk. You've taught me so much in this time span that I'm like, "Oh my god, wow, mind blown." And of course, looking at your social media, you're very knowledgeable. And I hope that's like affirming for you in some way. So as an expert, I want to ask you a question that it's probably burning like everyone's mind right now and like is a topic of conversation. So, because of COVID-19, we've had to get a little more creative with sex and dating because, you don't want to be, you can't be 6 feet apart, right? And like do what's traditionally known as like typical dating practices and typical sex practices. So, I would love to hear from you, even though like things are starting to reopen, but the virus is still there. There is still like the coronavirus is still real, contrary to what anyone wants to believe. It's still real, and I think even going forward as things begin to reopen, it's still going to be kind of a risk. So I would love to hear from you. How has coronavirus changed dating and sex? And how will it continue to adapt the way that we date and we have like sexual relations in this like COVID-19 post-COVID world?
So I was just talking to another sex educator earlier when we were talking about COVID, and we were mentioning germ bubbles, and I was just thinking, I'm like, oh, well, what if your like partner or whoever you're dating's within your like same germ bubble? I feel like that could be an option, but obviously it depends on like, okay, if you're immunocompromised, I'm personally at higher risk, so I'm just not dating right now. I don't feel the need to. I'm just working on myself. But for other people who do want to date and pursue that, they can. I feel like germ bubbles would probably be safer because I'm like, okay, if you really trust these people and know where they've been and like know how much to social distance and physical distance, I think that's a great way. Also, having dates outside, obviously when it's not like pouring cats and dogs, but um, when it's like sunny and like a nice day like this, like having a date in the park, socially distant, physically distant. Let's make that clear. Um, and then also cyber sex. I think it's really accessible to people with disabilities as well, especially those who are at higher risk for COVID and complications. Like personally, I would feel more comfortable if I'm sexting someone, whether it's through Snapchat, Signal, whatever. Um, and just like that, also sex toys, there's like long distance sex toys these days. So like if you have like a partner, you're like locked in with whatever partners, uh, assuming that like this person's monogamous. Um like if you have like a set partner, like you're monogamous or whatnot, I think that's also safer. But also with dating, like it constantly changes, so there's not really like you can't really guarantee that you're gonna have like one partner locked in. But I think sex toys that are like remote controlled, that's really fun. Like, hey, for example, if like someone was on a Zoom work call and they have like tingling panties, because I know those are a thing. um I saw them on a TV show once, so that's where I got that from. And like that could be a thing to like engage sexually. Obviously it's very safe, no one's kissing each other. um but if people really want the physical intimacy of kissing and being face to face, like you have to screen the people that you're gonna like date. Like like not only STIs, like okay, STIs, and then you have to talk about COVID status. Like okay, have you been around anyone with COVID? Um, where do you work? And I feel like that's harder for people who are essential workers. I really do not know how they're dating because I'm like, well, if you're in the face of COVID every day, I don't know how that happens. Um, and then there's also like mutual masturbation, maybe like 6 feet apart. Obviously, it depends on your risk factors. I think I'm not a public health expert, but like, um, I would say from my like what I've read online and the different articles and just think about it for myself within my own context, I'm like, okay, yeah, if I were to date someone and wanted to engage in sexual activity, mutual masturbation, that would be that would be like safer. But kissing and all these other like getting up in people's faces, I don't know about that. I don't know if that's safe. It doesn't seem safe to me, especially if you don't know like who they've been around, if they've been exposed. Um, because in certain areas of the country, COVID's just everywhere at this point. It seems like it's like community transmission in some places, but other places like NYC and Philly, they're doing like a little bit of a better job. But even then, you can't be sure because like people have been really bad about wearing masks, which people should, unless you have someone's consent to not wear a mask in that context. Um, but yeah, dating's gonna change. It's gonna be more virtual, I think, or it already is more virtual.
Like, in your opinion, do you think like COVID destroyed hookup culture? Because I know like pre-COVID, like my friends and I um, would like probably go to the bar and like you would see like a cute person. You're like, oh my god, hey, what's up? And then you dance and you do what you have to do, and then there's a lot of physical touch, and then sometimes it leads to making out in the bathroom, or making out on the dance floor, and like being in like nightlife, right? You're like this close to people, like there's like no space between anyone in the nightclub. So it's like, but like that's also a big part of hookup culture right now. Nightclub culture is a big part of hookup culture. So like, I would love to hear, like in your words, like, do you think COVID like destroyed hookup culture in a way?
I think that it might have because I don't see anyone at bars these days. I mean, maybe guaylos, maybe white people, but people that I know are not going to bars. Everyone's drinking at home over Zoom happy hours, which I'm just like, I don't know about that concept. I've not tried a Zoom happy hour, but it seems interesting. Um, and I think that like more people are doing intentional dating. I've talked to like 3 different friends who are single, and they're like, I'm done dating. Like, I just not necessarily want to lock it down, but I want to be more intentional about who I hang out with. And like, you can't necessarily do that if you're going to a bar. You don't know where the person's been, their STI status, like, which STIs are not bad. Just want to put that out there that they shouldn't be stigmatized at the same time. Or like their COVID status. Like, if you don't know your risk of exposure, then you probably I imagine most people wouldn't want to engage. I mean, maybe there's some people out there who would engage, but that's like 3% of the population or like 5% of the population. But like most people, I imagine don't want to engage. And like, I think that it's going to create more intentional dating and also people talking to their I've met people who talked to or like broke up with their exes and then somehow during quarantine they got back together. Like, I've heard like 2 or 3 stories from people in like the past 2 months or 3 months. And I'm like, oh, so like people are really reevaluating their relationships and really working on them now. So I feel like hookup culture will be less of a thing. I don't know how that's gonna work for polyamorous people like myself, because I literally don't know. I mean, I don't feel comfortable just like hooking up with anyone right now or ever, because it's just like I don't know what your exposure is, and I'm not gonna expose myself. And also, I'm like, I don't know how like is your house like Lysol down? Like, what's going on? So I just like don't think that hookup culture will be it will be less of a thing, and intentional dating and intentional hookups I think will be more of a thing. So like pre-planned stuff, which means that there's great like room to talk about consent and boundaries.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think like, it's interesting because everyone, including myself, has been reached out to, like a former lover or former person has reached out to them during quarantine, and you're just kind of, I think everyone's like reevaluating like all types of like things right now. And I do see intentional dating, and I agree. Like, I think intentional dating, intentional hookups are going to be more of common because, like you said, there's already that established trust factor where you're like, hey, let's talk about STI status, but also let's talk about COVID status now. Like, and I can trust you with that, and like we can work together, and obviously, hook up safely. And you kind of like already have like, you both have this like kind of like duty with like that duty of care. I hate to throw out some legal terms, but like it's the only one I could think of right now. Like that duty of care with the other person and everything. Um, so Sydney, thank you so much for talking to me. I like really appreciate your time and you like taking time out of your day to come do this show. As we're coming up on our hour, is there anything that you would like to promote, either your work, your Instagram handle, anything that you would like me to promote for you on this video right now? I mean this like the show right now.
So I am um so for institutions out there and organizations that are reevaluating their sexual assault measures and measures towards protecting survivors, I have workshops for your organizations. Please contact me because I have a wonderful consent and boundaries workshop that I want to bring to the Greek community and I want to bring to other communities that want it. Um, Especially academia, because academia needs people who don't necessarily have certifications because certifications are not important. So please contact me about that. And then I also have my 8-week program that's going to launch mid September. So look for that on my Instagram, and my Instagram is at Sydney Rae Chin at SYDNEYRAECHIN. And then I have a website launch in August 25th, which is just literally SYDNEYRAECHIN.com, SydneyRaeChin.com. So you can find more info on the workshops there. And I will be rolling out this 8-week program, which will include some virtual boudoir for five people who pay in full upfront, and then as well as a workbook for everyone. And there's going to be a lot of amazing activities, tarot, like it's going to be awesome. And it's going to be this container that is a braver space. I'm braver space because I can't necessarily guarantee a safe space, but I can guarantee a braver space where you're going to learn with other people. You're going to learn with me. We're going to learn from each other. Like, yeah, it's going to be great. So those are just like the few things that I have going on for me right now.
Well, perfect. And those are like amazing. That's like amazing work that you do. And thank you so much for pursuing this career and giving, especially API folks, a space to heal and to doing that work and undertaking that labor. I will be promoting Sydney's Instagram on this video, so it'll come on like the text will come on the video itself, and also down in the description below as well. So you can follow her work, look at her awesome boudoir pictures, watch her workshops, tune in, support her work, and of course, I'll even have the link to your website as well. Even if this video comes out before the launch, it's just there. Like I'll just have it just for you. So thank you so much, Sydney. I appreciate it. You know, hope I cannot wait to see what you roll out in the future. I'm so excited to follow your work on Instagram. It's been an honor to have you on the show and this platform today.
Thank
Right,
you.
bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.